August 16, 1945, Manila, Philippines. The American private first class couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He stood in the doorway of what had been a Japanese military comfort station, holding a clipboard and a pencil, looking uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the tropical heat. 23 Korean women sat on the floor of the barracks, their faces blank masks that had been practiced over years of necessary emotional absence. The young soldier cleared his throat. His name was Private James Morrison from Iowa, and he'd been assigned to civil affairs documentation. "Ma'am," he said to the woman closest to the door, his voice uncertain, "I need to get some information for our records. Can you tell me your name?" The woman, who had been known only as Number 7 for 3 years, looked up at him with an expression that would haunt Morrison for the rest of his life. Not fear, not hope, not relief. Confusion. Complete, absolute confusion. She turned to the woman next to her and spoke rapid Korean that Morrison couldn't understand. The second woman's eyes widened. She stood slowly, as if testing whether she would be struck down for the movement. "Name?" she repeated in broken English. "My name?" Morrison nodded, his pencil poised over his paper. "Yes, ma'am. Your name. Where you're from. So we can help get you home." What Private Morrison didn't know, what none of the American occupation forces processing these women in the Philippines, Okinawa, Burma, and across the former Japanese Empire understood initially, was that they had stumbled into one of the war's most profound revelations. Not about military strategy or industrial capacity, but about the fundamental difference between how two nations viewed human beings. In the Japanese military system, these women had been equipment, supplies, listed in logistics reports between ammunition and rations. They had numbers, not names. They were comfort, provided to soldiers the way one might provide cigarettes or sake. The Americans, with their clipboards and their awkward politeness, were asking their names. The psychological impact of this simple question would prove more powerful than any weapon, more transformative than any military victory, revealing a chasm between civilizations that neither side had fully understood. The comfort women system, euphemistically called Ianfu in Japanese, had been established systematically beginning in 1932. The Imperial Japanese Army, learning from the 1937 Nanjing incident, where mass rapes by soldiers had damaged military discipline and international reputation, decided the solution was not to stop the abuse of women, but to organize and regulate it. By 1942, the system had expanded across the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Estimates vary, but between 50,000 and 200,000 women, the majority Korean, were forced into sexual slavery for the Japanese military. They came from Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, and other occupied territories. Some were kidnapped. Some were deceived by promises of factory work or nursing positions. Some were sold by desperately poor families who believed the lies about respectable employment. The youngest were 12 years old. The logistics of the system revealed its true nature. Women were classified in Japanese military documents as military supplies under the code comfort items. They appeared in shipping manifests alongside ammunition. When military units moved, the women moved with them as cargo. Official Japanese military documents discovered after the war used language that removed all humanity. One report from Burma, dated March 1943, noted received shipment of 70 new comfort items to replace worn-out stock. The worn-out stock were women who had been used until they died or became too ill to continue serving 20 to 30 soldiers per day. The numbering system was efficient. Women were assigned numbers upon arrival at comfort stations. In Korean comfort stations, they were given Japanese names to erase their identity further. Kim Sun-ok became Haruko. Park Young-sim became Yoshiko. These weren't chosen names but assigned designations like serial numbers on equipment. The daily routine was documented in captured Japanese military regulations. Women were required to service enlisted men during the day, NCOs in the evening, and officers had priority access at night. The regulations specified pricing: 3 yen for enlisted men, 5 yen for NCOs, 10 yen for officers, though the women never saw this money. Medical inspections occurred weekly, not for the women's health, but to protect soldiers from venereal disease. Women who became pregnant were forcibly aborted, or in some cases, killed. What made the system particularly devastating was its bureaucratic normality. Comfort stations appeared on military maps with official designations. They had supply requisition forms. Officers filed reports on the condition and availability of comfort facilities as routinely as they reported ammunition stocks. The dehumanization was so complete that many Japanese soldiers genuinely believed they were using a service, not raping enslaved women. Post-war testimony from Japanese veterans reveals this shocking normality. One former sergeant interviewed in 1992 recalled, "We thought of it like going to a canteen. You waited in line, paid your money, did your business, and left. I never thought about them having names or families. They were just there." August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. Across the empire, Japanese military units began the chaotic process of demobilization. In this chaos, the fate of comfort women became an afterthought. Some Japanese commanders simply abandoned the stations, leaving women locked inside buildings without food or water. Other commanders, fearing war crimes prosecution, tried to eliminate evidence. Documents were burned. Some women were killed to prevent testimony. In Manila, the commander of the comfort station near Fort Santiago ordered his men to dispose of all equipment before the Americans arrived. His men interpreted this literally. They began shooting the women. Private Morrison's unit, Company B of the 37th Infantry Division, reached the compound on August 16th before the massacre was complete. They found 19 women already dead and 23 alive, huddled in the far barracks. The Americans who entered that building encountered something none of their training had prepared them for. Captain Robert Chen, the Chinese-American officer who commanded the company, spoke some Mandarin and could communicate minimally with 2 Chinese women in the group. What they told him made him physically ill. He immediately radioed division headquarters for medical support and interpreter assistance. The documentation process that Private Morrison had been ordered to begin was standard occupation procedure. Civil affairs teams were identifying displaced persons, documenting war crimes, and processing refugees. The forms asked for name, age, hometown, family contacts, and a brief description of their situation. Simple questions. But when Morrison asked that first woman her name, the response revealed something the Americans hadn't anticipated. She didn't know how to answer. Not because of a language barrier, though that existed, but because the concept of being asked her name by a soldier was so foreign to her experience that she couldn't process it. Through interpreters who arrived over the next few hours, American soldiers pieced together what had happened to these women. Each story was unique in its details, but identical in its horror. Kim Soon-yi had been 15 when taken from her village in Korea in 1942. She'd been told she was going to a factory to make uniforms. Instead, she'd spent 3 years in comfort stations across the Philippines. She had been number 12. That was the only identity she'd been allowed. When asked her real name, she wept, not from relief or joy, but from the pain of remembering she had once been a person with a name. The American response to discovering the comfort women system was institutional shock. Military government teams scrambling to process thousands of displaced persons suddenly confronted a category of victim they hadn't imagined. The initial reports sent back to headquarters were vague and confused. Officers struggled to find appropriate language. One report from Manila, dated August 20th, noted, "Have encountered approximately 200 females who were held in conditions of military brothel slavery. They appear to have been treated as military equipment rather than prisoners. Request guidance on processing and repatriation." What made the American reaction distinct wasn't just humanitarian concern, though that existed. It was the fundamental inability to comprehend the system's logic. American military culture, despite its own deep flaws and prejudices, couldn't process the concept of women as logistics items. Staff Sergeant William Rodriguez, working with the Civil Affairs team in Manila, tried to explain it in a letter home. These women were listed in Japanese supply documents between spare tank treads and rice rations, not as people who needed supplies, as supplies themselves. How does a mind work that way? The contrast in treatment began immediately and unconsciously. American soldiers, many barely older than the youngest comfort women, defaulted to the politeness they'd been raised with. They said "ma'am" and "miss." They asked permission before entering rooms. They offered food and water before asking questions. These small courtesies, routine in American culture, were revelations to women who had been treated as objects for years. Corporal David Kim, a Korean-American interpreter from California, became crucial in processing Korean women. His first conversation with a group of 15 Korean women in Manila revealed the psychological damage. He introduced himself in Korean, explained he was American, and asked if they needed medical attention. One woman started laughing, not happy laughter, but the laughter of someone whose reality has shattered. Through her laughter, she said, "He asked if we need help." He asked, not ordered, asked. The medical care provided to comfort women by American military doctors revealed another stark contrast. Japanese military doctors had treated these women, but only as one might maintain equipment. The medical focus was preventing disease transmission to soldiers, not caring for the women's health. Examinations were brutal and humiliating. Treatment, when provided, was minimal. American military doctors, encountering women with years of accumulated medical problems, malnutrition, untreated infections, and psychological trauma, responded with the full capabilities of American military medicine. This proved almost as shocking as the initial liberation. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, an Army nurse with the 142nd General Hospital in Manila, was among the first American medical personnel to examine comfort women. Her report, filed September 1, 1945, provided clinical detail that horrified headquarters. The patients present with severe malnutrition, untreated venereal diseases, evidence of multiple forced abortions, and physical trauma consistent with sustained sexual violence. Many have injuries that were never properly treated. All show signs of severe psychological trauma. They are terrified of male doctors initially, then confused when treated with gentleness. Several have asked if there will be a charge for medical care. When told treatment is free, they don't believe her. The question of names became central to the recovery process. American administrative procedures required names for all displaced persons, but many women either couldn't remember their original names after years of being called by numbers or Japanese pseudonyms, or were afraid to give them. Some feared their families wouldn't accept them back. Others worried about shame and stigma. The Americans' response was to give them control. If a woman didn't want to reveal her real name, she could choose one. If she wanted to be called by her number until she was ready to reclaim her identity, that was accepted. The simple act of giving women choice, after years of having none, became therapeutic. Private Morrison, the young soldier who'd asked that first question, ended up spending 3 weeks helping process comfort women in Manila. He later told his family that the experience changed his understanding of humanity. The first few days, they looked at us like we might hurt them any second. When we kept treating them like people, you could see something wake up inside them, like they'd been asleep or dead, and slowly came back to life. All because we asked their names and listened when they answered. The scale of the comfort women system only became clear as American occupation forces spread across former Japanese territories. In Okinawa, American Marines discovered comfort stations that had been operating until days before surrender. In Burma, British and American forces found women abandoned by retreating Japanese units. In Indonesia, Dutch authorities working with American liaison officers documented extensive networks of comfort stations that had served Japanese occupation forces. Each discovery added to the growing horror, and each group of women had the same initial response to Allied treatment: confusion at being treated as human beings. Sergeant First Class Thomas Washington, an African-American NCO from Georgia working with displaced persons in Okinawa, found the contrast particularly bitter. "I'm from the South," he said in a 1946 interview. "I know what it's like to be treated as less than human. These women had it worse than anything I'd seen, but here's the thing. The Japanese treated them like objects, and we treated them like ladies. And I'm watching white soldiers from Alabama and Mississippi saying yes ma'am and excuse me ma'am to Asian women they'd just freed. War makes people strange." The documentation process revealed the system's extent through captured Japanese records. Americans discovered that comfort stations had been carefully mapped and logged. Japanese military bureaucracy had maintained meticulous records of locations, capacity, and personnel, though the personnel were listed as numbers or false names. One document captured in Rabaul listed Comfort Station Number 3, capacity 15 units, current inventory 12 units, request replacement of 3 units. The language shocked American translators. Captain James Nakamura, a Nisei translator working with occupation headquarters in Tokyo, was ordered to translate comfort station documents. "I had to stop several times," he recalled. "These weren't brothel records. These were logistics documents. They discussed women the way you'd discuss ammunition or fuel, units to be rotated out, inventory to be replenished." The casual inhumanity was worse than explicit violence because it showed they'd completely stopped seeing these women as people. The repatriation process created unexpected complications. Many women didn't want to go home. The shame of what had happened to them, even though they were victims, meant they feared family rejection. Korean women faced particular difficulties. Korean culture's emphasis on female purity meant many believed they could never marry or be accepted back into society. Some women asked to stay in the Philippines or wherever they'd been liberated rather than face their families. The Americans, unprepared for this, struggled to find solutions. Social workers attached to military government units worked to address this. Captain Dorothy Hughes, a social worker from New York assigned to displaced persons operations, spent months in Manila working specifically with former comfort women. The Japanese had convinced many of them that they were worthless, she reported. They believed they deserved what had happened. Our job was to help them understand they were victims, not criminals, that they had value as human beings. It sounds simple, but after years of being treated as objects, they'd internalized that identity. The simple acts of normal human kindness became therapeutic interventions. When American soldiers held doors open for comfort women, addressed them respectfully, and asked permission before approaching them, it slowly rebuilt their sense of personhood. When doctors explained treatment options and asked for consent, it restored agency. When administrative officers wrote down their real names carefully and promised to help them get home safely, it acknowledged their humanity. One Korean woman, identified in records only as Mrs. K because she never revealed her full name, told social workers in October 1945, "The American soldier who gave me his rations when he saw I was hungry. He didn't want anything from me, he just gave me food because I needed food. I didn't understand at first. I thought there must be a price, but he just walked away. That's when I knew I might be human again." The contrast with Japanese treatment extended beyond the comfort women themselves. American forces discovered that Japanese military culture had thoroughly normalized the system. Enlisted men's diaries captured after the war casually mentioned visiting comfort stations the way American GIs wrote about going to movies or USO shows. Officers' journals discussed comfort women as an administrative concern, like laundry services. One Japanese lieutenant's diary from Burma noted, "The comfort women arrived today. Morale should improve. The men have been complaining about the lack of facilities for 3 weeks." This casual acceptance shocked American investigators. How could an entire military system, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, participate in or tolerate systematic rape without moral qualm? The answer lay partly in propaganda and indoctrination. Japanese soldiers were taught that conquered peoples were inferior and existed to serve the empire. Women from conquered territories were doubly inferior, both as colonized people and as women. The military education system had removed moral barriers to their exploitation, but the captured documents also revealed something darker. Many Japanese soldiers and officers genuinely believed they were providing a service to these women. Some diaries expressed the view that comfort women should be grateful for military protection and regular meals, however minimal. This delusion that enslaved and raped women should be thankful for their situation represented a level of moral blindness that American investigators found almost incomprehensible. American soldiers, whatever their own prejudices and failures, generally understood that rape was wrong and that slavery was evil. The Japanese military had created a system that made both routine and justified them as military necessity. The testimony of former comfort women collected by American military government teams throughout late 1945 and 1946 painted a consistent picture: the initial abduction or deception, the shock of discovering the truth, the numbering and dehumanization, the systematic violence, and then the stunning contrast of American liberation. One woman testified, "When the Japanese came to our village, they took 10 of us girls. They said we would work in factories. On the ship they gave us numbers. I was number 23. For 3 years, I was number 23. Japanese soldiers never asked my name, they used numbers. Then the Americans came. The first thing they wanted to know was my name. I had almost forgotten I had one." The American military's response to the comfort women system influenced post-war policy. The War Department distributed information about the system to all occupation forces, emphasizing that these women were victims of war crimes, not willing prostitutes. This wasn't just humanitarian concern, but practical necessity. Some American soldiers initially misunderstood the situation and treated freed comfort women as prostitutes. Reports of inappropriate behavior led to explicit orders that comfort women were to be treated as displaced war victims requiring protection and medical care, with violations punishable by court-martial. The cultural gulf revealed by American treatment of comfort women extended beyond immediate liberation. As occupation continued, American authorities had to address the question of justice. The comfort women system clearly constituted war crimes, but prosecution was complicated. The Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal included some testimony about comfort women, but the issue wasn't central to the proceedings. Some historians argue this was a failure of justice, but even the limited American acknowledgement of these women's suffering contrasted sharply with Japanese official responses. Where Americans documented, investigated, and provided medical and psychological care, Japanese authorities initially denied the system had existed beyond normal military brothels. The long-term impact of the contrasting treatment appeared in unexpected ways. Korean women who had been liberated by American forces and treated with basic human dignity often expressed gratitude decades later, not for the liberation itself, which simply ended one form of suffering before another began when they faced family and societal rejection, but for being recognized as human beings. One survivor interviewed in the 1990s said, "The Americans were the first people in years who treated me like a person. They asked my name. They gave me food without wanting anything. They said they were sorry for what had happened to me. The Japanese never did. Not once. Not ever." The comfort women system and the American response to discovering it revealed something fundamental about the two societies at war. Japan, for all its technological sophistication and military prowess, had created a system that treated women as logistics equipment. The United States, for all its own deep flaws regarding race and women's rights, instinctively recognized comfort women as human beings deserving of dignity. This wasn't American moral superiority. American forces committed their own atrocities during the war. But the baseline cultural assumption that people have names and deserve to be asked them, that women are human beings, not objects, created a gulf between the two societies that no amount of shared humanity could bridge. Private Morrison, the soldier who'd asked that first question, returned to Iowa in 1946. He became a teacher and rarely spoke about the war. But in 1985, when the Comfort Women issue began receiving public attention, he wrote a letter to his local newspaper. "I was 19 years old when I met those women in Manila. I didn't understand what had happened to them at first. When I did understand, I couldn't believe human beings could treat other human beings that way. I asked them their names because that's what you do when you meet people. You ask their names." The fact that nobody had asked them that in years, that such a simple act of politeness could make them cry, told me everything about what they'd survived, and everything about the evil of what had been done to them. The story of Comfort Women and American liberation isn't a story of American heroism. The Americans didn't save these women from anything. By the time US forces arrived, years of damage had been done that no amount of kind treatment could undo. Many women never recovered psychologically. Most faced shame and rejection when they returned home. Some committed suicide, others lived in shadows, hiding their past. But in the moment of liberation, the contrast between being treated as numbered equipment by the Japanese military and being treated as human beings with names by American soldiers revealed something profound. It showed that even in war's depths, even after years of systematic dehumanization, simple recognition of human dignity could begin healing. A clipboard, a pencil, and a polite question. "What's your name?" For women who had been numbers for years, that question was the first step back toward personhood. The Japanese never asked because they never cared. The Americans asked because they'd been raised to believe that everyone has a name and everyone deserves to be heard. That difference, more than any military victory, revealed which society had maintained its humanity through war's horror. The physical evidence of the contrast between Japanese and American treatment survived in documents. Japanese comfort station records, when they weren't burned, listed women by numbers in columns. Monthly reports tracked how many units serviced how many soldiers. Replacement requests specified quantities needed. One captured document from a station in Singapore read, "Current inventory, 18 units, 3 units non-functional due to illness, request 5 replacement units." The women classified as non-functional had tuberculosis and venereal disease so severe they couldn't work. They were left to die without treatment. American displaced persons forms from the same period showed a stark difference. Each form began with the question "full name" in block letters at the top. Below that, preferred name, if different. Then questions about hometown, family, and what assistance do you need. The forms assumed personhood. They assumed the woman being documented had preferences, had family who cared about her, had a hometown to return to. They assumed she deserved a choice in how she was identified. These weren't radical concepts in American bureaucracy. They were standard. But to women whose existence had been reduced to numbers in Japanese logistics reports, these forms represented a philosophy so different it took time to comprehend. The repatriation ships that carried comfort women home in late 1945 and 1946 became floating communities of healing. American military personnel assigned to accompany them continued the pattern of basic human respect. Women were given private quarters, not cargo holds. They received 3 meals daily, not starvation rations. Medical staff made daily rounds asking how they felt, not examining them like livestock. One Korean woman who returned home in December 1945 wrote years later, "On the American ship taking us to Busan, we had beds, real beds with sheets. The American sailors called us Mom when they brought food. I had been a number for so long that hearing, 'Yes, Mom,' 'Right away, Mom,' made me feel like maybe I could be a person again. When I got home, My village rejected me. I was impure, they said, but I remembered those American boys who treated me like a lady. At least someone had seen me as human. The documentation collected by American forces became crucial historical evidence. Unlike the Japanese, who destroyed records and denied the system's existence for decades, Americans preserved testimony, medical records, and administrative documents. This wasn't moral superiority, but institutional habit. American military bureaucracy documented everything. That bureaucratic impulse to record and file meant that when survivors sought recognition decades later, evidence existed. The clipboards and pencils that seemed so mundane in 1945 became tools of historical justice. The names carefully written down by soldiers like Private Morrison became proof that these women had existed, had suffered, and deserved recognition.